Hi, welcome back to another edition of Relatable. I am your host, Stephanie Michele. This is the show where we talk about exceptional human encounters, the people who make them happen and the actions that it takes to create them, because I think both of those are very important right now. Today, I'm thinking about the brain, thanks to my new friends in France called brainsfeed.com. The ability to change continuously through a person's life is called neuroplasticity. I knew I was going to mess that up. I'm going to try it again in a minute, so bear with me. The brain has the ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Neuroplasticity is the muscle building part of the brain. The things that we do often we become stronger at, and what we don't use fades away. That is the physical basics of what is making a thought or action over and over again increase in power. So over time it becomes automatic, a part of us. We literally, and this is a really important statement right here, we literally become what we think and do. We become what we think. So think about that for a minute. How are your thoughts repeated over and over again? Are they supporting you or are they causing you harm? It's a big question, right? So none of us alone can change what's happening around us. We can, however, change how we're experiencing the world by changing our mindset. A person with a growth mindset believes that he or she can be smarter, better, or be more skilled at something through sustained effort, which is exactly what neuroplasticity tells us. Some of us didn't like school or learning. I was kind of halfway in the middle. I don't know. I liked it all right. Some of us were even told we had learning disabilities, but telling ourselves that we can't learn or don't like learning is the only thing that's actually standing in the way of learning. It's kind of like fear. The only thing is fear is fear itself. We also get to choose the type of learning we get to do as adults, which is really cool. We can start with something playful and just be curious and see where it takes us. So question for chat today, if you're watching on YouTube right now live, what are you learning right now? What would you like to learn about? How are you going to go about learning? With each episode of Relatable, I am always learning. The most important thing I think I've learned since I've started this show is how important our connection to each other is. With just simple words of like validation or encouragement or empathy, we literally can change somebody's life and assist in healing. And there's nothing more important than our ability to connect and love on each other. Through this process, we can create a better world. Love on yourself by paying attention to your thoughts. Love on each other by creating space and time for those thoughts, to process those thoughts together. Speaking of love, there's a couple things going on in LA right now. It's warm again. It actually feels like summer. I'm loving it. The sun is outside. We didn't even have doom gloom today. I'm digging it. So I'm also kind of leaned into this like summer island vibe because I need a vacation, and thanks to Avocado, I've got like a new Avocado outfit on that I'm digging. That's really making it accessible. I think I can make this vacation plan happen soon. If you haven't checked out her website in a while, please do. It's avocado.com. She told me the last time I was there that a lot of times when you're ordering from the website, things are made to order. So if you don't see a color or something on the site, just ask, reach out to customer service, and they may be able to make something in another color. She's done that for me, and I know that they do that. So use the promo code RELATE20 to get 20% off your order, and let me know if you get something. I want to know. So today, I suspect my guest has a lot of learning and brain plasticity going on at all times in her brain, because I've only known her for a while, and I know some of the things that she's experimenting with, so I think there's a lot of things firing up there. So joining me today on the couch is Erika Berger. She's Forbes 30 and under award-winning journalist, artist, and media theorist. We're going to find out what that means. With a background in environment and policy, over 10 years of experience working in media in Los Angeles and New York, she believes that coordinated efforts and a move towards interdependence, a big theme, you're like so supposed to be here, can change the way we interact with each other and with the planet. Yes, I love that. If you're lucky, you might find her teaching Kundalini yoga or trying her hand at stand-up sketch comedy. Yeah, those are all great things. Your brain is constantly firing.
I love neuroplasticity.
Thank you for hitting it on the first say. I don't know why I couldn't hit that.
It's a complicated word, but you know what? I read a book called The Buddha's Brain a few years ago that my mom actually gave me, and I think it's the book I give out the most to other people. And it's by this well-known doctor who's obsessed with neuroplasticity.
We're going to have to get the link for that book.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. But yeah, I teach this type of yoga called Kundalini that is a over 5,000-year-old lineage of teachings, and there were 8,000 lectures given. And part of why I decided after a 16-year vinyasa practice to get into Kundalini, besides an injury, was because of the access to information and to all of the kind of knowledge sharing. And playing off the neuroplasticity kind of theory of being able to continually learn as an adult, even though our brains actually it becomes harder to learn after 25. And I think you probably know that after 10 it's harder to learn a new language. So we know a lot about kind of deterioration, but we're starting to finally learn more about plasticity and the ability to actually kind of regain the energy, which is what we talk about in Kundalini. Pull in more energy, and you repattern your neuron structure and your subconscious thought patterns, which is kind of what you were inferring before, into a more positive direction.
Yes, I love it. I'm so glad that I decided to talk about that and have you here today. It seems very meaningful. It seems like now. So besides that, so I always ask everybody that joins us on the couch if there's anything that's kind of pulling your attention before we talk about what we're going to talk about today. Do you want to share that? So it's like, what has your attention right now?
Sure. So I try to live by the seasons, and I don't know about you, you referenced the heat and the sun, but I've been feeling a lot of that kind of solar energy, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. I was recently in New York and Toronto, and the change of seasons was happening. It was pouring rain, and then it was hot. I got back here, and it was hotter than I can remember it being. And so trying to kind of honor that shift, and feeling how it feels in the body, feeling how it feels in the mind, and not pushing so hard with work. And I'm kind of embroiled in this interesting challenge in downtown LA, which is where we are now, and I love downtown, but there are some challenges at a city planning level that we're all experiencing that have made the national news. And I'm involved in my neighborhood kind of arts district conversations around what does development look like, what does sustainable development look like. And it's interesting because we're having these serious conversations, but I don't think the season and the energy of our exterior environment is actually good and aligned with having these serious conversations. And I'm seeing a lot of kind of misfires and miscommunication happening. And I know that it's intuitively like from the heat and the kind of longer days and moonlit kind of nights. And so I'm trying to kind of play with that and tone things down a little bit.
To elaborate a little bit on that. So you don't think people are focused in the conversation because of the season?
I think it's the worst time to be having these kind of serious policy-driven conversations when it's literally the longest days of the year, and it's the hottest days of the year thus far. And we just came out of these heavy rains, and I would hope that we start to live a more seasonal life over the next few years as people become more connected with what's going on in the environment and climate. And start to pay attention to maybe this isn't the best time to be having these like serious long-term oriented policy decisions. It's similar in the like venture and media world where they kind of say you can't raise money in the summertime. Nobody's like really, out to lunch. Like it's not, you raise money in the spring and in the fall. And you don't raise money around the holidays or in the summer.
We hear this so often though, this like, it's not the right time for this conversation. Like I think immediately gun control, right? Every time a tragedy happens, we hear, oh, it's not the right time to have this conversation. So it seems like there's some learning just around that phrase and like, well, if it's not the right time, how do we schedule the right time? Or how do we at least just, we're not going to do the big heavy lifting, like at least make some little momentum moves to get to that point where we can have this conversation. Because that is, for lack of a better phrase, seems to be the cop-out all the time. It's not the right time. Well, when is it?
I think a lot of these conversations, especially at the politics level, are reactive. instead of proactive.
Absolutely.
Right? And
Absolutely.
if you think about our health, we have the same issue.
Yeah.
We're always reacting to a health challenge.
Yeah.
We're reacting to violence. We're reacting to, oh shoot, like there's going to be so much traffic in my neighborhood. There's too many liquor licenses. How do we like react to this, as opposed to proactively coming together and saying, how do we collaboratively like solve for this problem? Which goes back to kind of my obsession with interdependence, which necessitates better planning.
Yeah, and I don't know who said it recently, but there are problems that we're having right now that if we were proactive, they would be easier to solve.
Absolutely.
But we're so behind on the reactive stuff that we haven't come up with the solutions. We haven't sat down and talked about these things, that it seems overwhelming and in need of major change, like everything feels like.
I think what's worth noting, I want to circle back to the brain again, is that we're really playing in our reptilian brains. Right? Our fight or flight.
Yes.
Mode, which is natural.
Yes.
And so when we remember to honor that, that's literally how we evolved, and that's our natural state.
Yeah.
But we are evolving our consciousness now, and we are self-aware enough now that we can start to play with that and shift that response.
Yeah.
As long as we notice it.
So that's a good transition to talk about media. Like, I want to hear your brief history in the world of media.
Sure.
Like, what's been your experience? What have you learned?
I think contextually, it's important to note that I grew up in the Midwest. And
me too.
Oh, cool. And my family had like 4 to 6 papers in the house every day, which I thought was normal, and it wasn't, especially for being in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a house infused with media and culture. I was a big reader.
Would you read the paper at a young age?
No, I wasn't reading the paper. I was really into fiction books.
Okay.
I was also like, I have half siblings, but I was kind of an only child. And I read a lot of books in my room. Like, that was my alone time.
Yeah.
And we didn't really watch that much TV. But so when I came out to college in Los Angeles, my intention was to become a scientist. And I had known I'd wanted to be an environmental scientist since I was young. And halfway through college, I realized that I didn't really want to be on an island in the middle of nowhere doing research for so many different reasons. And that's kind of when I started my track towards policy. And at the end of school, I ended up working on a doc film all about the environment and about the history of oil and the future of renewable energy. Wow. And realized that storytelling was one of my main skill sets that felt natural. I edited an indie music blog in college for fun, to go to shows for free. And my meditation teacher, 7 years ago, would say, follow your charm, follow your bliss. And had I known that at 16, I would have clearly realized that actually storytelling and media and writing and having conversations with people was actually what was more natural to me. And so, I followed that charm and ended up in New York City and was still editing that indie music blog. I moved to Williamsburg in 2009, which was a great time to be in the music scene in New York. And I ended up working at The Economist, which was a publication I found when I was 17 through one of my best friends in Chicago. We were a little bit eccentric, obviously.
At 17, reading The Economist?
Yeah, I don't know how she found it. I actually should call her and ask her. She works in public policy and urban planning in Atlanta now. But I applied to a job I found in the classified section online in December 2009 and very unexpectedly got it, which we can circle back to later because it goes back to kind of coincidences and following your charm. And fell in love with working in digital media and being kind of at this junction where the print and broadcast world were really trying to grapple with how to build businesses and build audiences online.
And were they were grappling with, are we in competition with each other? Can we do this together? I remember that time.
Yeah, and I think what was fascinating to me was how many different publishers were trying to figure out what their voice was online and what the difference was. And I think the publishers that were able to individuate and have an opinion and a specific voice digitally were the ones who kind of came out at the top versus the publishers who were just kind of copying what they had done successfully in print and broadcast. Not like being site specific, pun intended, they fell apart.
And where are we now with this? So, I mean, we're going to take a big jump from there to now, but
10 years.
Yeah. But it's a big jump because how significantly things have changed in the media.
Yeah.
How would you describe that? And like, where do you?
Well, so we saw a lot of growth between 2009 to 2013. There was a lot of investing, a lot of new types of sites launching. I think people that did well were targeting niche audiences. And then there was a period of time, really 3 to 4 years, where there was a complete and utter lack of investment in media, which happens to be when I tried to start a company, which was so educational, but also really challenging. I started the first kind of slow news network, trying to build the weekend edition of the paper online, a less is more approach. And people just didn't realize we needed that at the time. There was this kind of deluge of content. And then I think the elections happened around the world, not just in the US, in 2016. And we saw the rise of nationalism and really the kind of parsing of communities that we're now very aware of, which I believe was happening before, and it just became more apparent through the election cycles. And then people realized that we needed to kind of invest in media again. Now, at the same time, there's really been an utter lack of antitrust lawsuits in the US against big technology firms and big media companies between the early 90s to really 2016. And that has played into where we're at today in a meaningful way.
I feel like we have to back up a little bit. So when you talked about like the ones that were successful, the media companies that were successful, they found a niche, right? I think, and I don't know, and I think you'll be able to tell me, but I'm guessing that in finding that niche, a lot of what, they weren't too concerned about what maybe they were creating in that niche. They were maybe giving different groups a voice, good or bad, but if it was making money, good to them, right? They were basing it based on, if we're making revenue off this, then we're good.
I don't know if that's what they were basing it off of, because a lot of these companies had a lot of debt, right? They took on capital. So I would actually argue it wasn't about revenue, it was about engagement and audience and shares, right? And measuring the demographics. And
so you think at that time then it was still, there was some organic, good-hearted nature about like, okay, if people are finding their voice and finding a connection to this content, then we're going to keep giving it to them, but it's not necessarily all about profit. Like,
totally.
Okay. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm actually like an optimist. I think I know a lot of people that started these companies, and a lot of them look like and sound like us, and were able to raise capital based on their passion for the space. And I think the challenge has been trying to build a media company in a world where advertising is really at the core of everything online. Right. And you started the show off with advertising, which is amazing that you've been able to monetize your show. But everything online is now about advertising, and the algorithms actually amplify people who are paying to play. And that was not the case until the last few decades, really. Now, but like the New York Times, most of the newsroom is now paid for by circulation revenue, which is fantastic, right? So we're seeing a shift. But I think a lot of companies have been collapsing and are going to continue collapsing because they took on too much debt capital and haven't been able to actually monetize.
And do you think in taking on that debt that they've made some choices that haven't been really good about which kind of content? So I mean, and
hiring choices
obviously
too.
I'm trying to get, like, I think most people feel like they have a bad relationship with the media or they don't trust it. I don't know what the statistics are and what the polls, but we're all like, media, I don't, and whether it's conscious or not, it's like there's something bad in the mix, right? Like we don't feel good about it. Where do you think that really started to happen? And do you see, because you are optimistic, like, do you see some solutions? Like, maybe now is the time for your slow news. It seems like if we could get back to that, but so those are two very big.
So I think like the notion of media with a capital M in and of itself is incredibly problematic because it implies that there's one big group of people who are consolidating efforts and like acting against the public's interest. And that really goes back to the Citizen Kane era. Okay, it goes back to yellow journalism. It goes back to William Randolph Hearst, who I also want to circle back to because one of my current projects that isn't a news project is actually referencing what he did to our country in the 1930s.
Wow.
But yeah, I think that there is some real loyalty and appreciation for various outlets. And that goes to both sides of the table, right? People love Fox News. People also love The Economist. People love The Atlantic. A lot of my girlfriends love Refinery 29, right? And so there's loyalty when you break it down to the independent organizations and the companies, and then the voices and the people behind the content, right? And I think that really goes to
the
society
writers
in
too.
general.
I think I think you kind of form a connection with like, I really like how this person writes, and I feel like I can trust this person.
Right.
Like we care about the same things.
And at the end of the day, it is about the creatives behind the stories. And so when you bring it back to the human level, the human scale, and take away that big M and realize that there are people like us that are working at these companies, and you realize who you connect with and think about why you connect with them, it changes the entire conversation.
So maybe like maybe this is our social challenge, but thinking about it on a one-to-one personal relationship, which I really think a lot of solutions and many of the things that are wrong are here. They're like one-to-one. But so maybe the new reframing is, don't look at the big brand of media, like find a couple writers, like learn about them, like read a couple things that they've wrote and connect with that.
I mean, what's interesting is that in 2013, there were studies that came out saying that we trust discovering content from our social networks more than going to homepages or going to brands, right? 2013. And so when you apply that to what I was just saying about finding the authors, finding the creators, finding the hosts that you really connect with, I wonder if that holds, right? Even if we don't know the person personally, do we trust a creator, a writer, a producer, a host, if we actually like know their name and follow their work? And that plays into Instagram, right? So I see a lot of writers and hosts, journalists, podcasters growing their Instagram following. And I think that especially younger people are connecting more with storytellers that way.
So then it becomes, so like what's coming up for me when you're sharing that is, so then it becomes like, how do we determine what is fact and what's opinion? Like, so if we are connecting human to human, which I'm all for, and getting information that way, where are the opportunities to be really steered wrong? Because there's not there's not really known facts in the equation, or there are a lot of opinions are presented as facts. Like, how do we?
Yeah, punditry. There's a lot of punditry these days, which is my biggest issue with the news. But I think that's where the larger brand comes in, and understanding editorial processes, and there are fact-checking processes, and that there are editors, but also having some kind of literacy on a personal level, a digital literacy, which we really lack. I had no digital news literacy before I entered the industry.
What do you mean by that?
So understanding that, like, when I write something, it's never my own headline. That an editor has come in and said, this is going to create more clicks, it's going to be more contentious, and therefore we're going to title your piece this, even if it doesn't really fully explain. So we're just going
to change a couple words to make it a little more sensationalized or whatever.
And knowing that and saying, I understand that this is not the crux of the piece, let me see that.
I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was some place that journalists like you got to put their original piece before it was edited and sensationalized next to each other, just like, what would that do?
That would be like the insider's dream.
Yeah, what would that, I can't even imagine what that would do.
Yeah, so just understanding just a little bit of how the digital news gets made. But also that there are companies, I used to work for a company called Storyful, and we were the first company tackling fake news. And it was started in 2010. And we didn't shout about what we were doing to the public, but we worked with every news organization and also with Google and Twitter to make sure that we were verifying news emerging from social networks.
So you were more acting out and talking to those companies to go, hey, have you verified this? Like, here's some facts.
We did all of the verification, and they paid
So you
us.
were like a third-party support?
Yeah, we were like an AP or Reuters.
Okay.
But the public didn't really know that was happening. And I, have thoughts about whether or not we should have talked publicly and kind of evangelized our service so people had more faith in the news, knowing that there were people, literally 20 journalists and then people on the ground around the world, and technological systems that we had built to make sure that they weren't seeing fake news. But I think I haven't brought up social networks in a meaningful enough way yet. And I think what has happened on Facebook and on Twitter and in various algorithms, especially 2012 to 2016, 17, around news and manipulation around how we see content and what stories we see is really the issue that we've come up against.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was so on that, and nobody cared. Like my friends did not care about that.
Right.
It meant my family did not care about that. And what I was trying to say, and I think that's actually one of the reasons I started this show, is that information is I call a lot of it fast food content, right? It's just put in front of us, we're consuming it. It's not making us well, and it's definitely not making us well when you've consumed it in a way that you haven't fact checked it or wondered, what is the source? And then when you go to sit down with a relative and you're having this like really intense argument over politics, and you're like, well, where did you learn that? They can't tell you,
right?
Because it was so sophisticated how that was all, how that was happening, how information was being put in front of people with a certainty that they would have a response. They could predict that they would have a response with 99% accuracy that was like more accurate than the spouse that they lived with, like in terms of knowledge of that person. So
goes back to the reptilian brain again.
Yeah, like yes. And I like that, I mean, even just again, like thinking about like what that did to our relationships kills me. Like, I mean, it really is the motivation for the show. It's just like we've got to, like, yes, learn, but participating in call-out culture and shaming people and not sitting down and having a conversation or talking in terms of memes without, like, honoring the relationships that we have and the work that's required to keep those up, you know? That hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Have you ever read a book called The Information Diet by Clay Johnson?
No, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be asking for that. Yeah.
When you said it's like eating fast food, the talk I used to give for my company was called Click Like You Eat.
Yeah.
And I wasn't saying don't eat junk. I was saying you have to create your perfect blend.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to help people do. I just don't think the timing was correct or the way that we executed was correct. But I still think, and conversations about morning practices kind of start to touch on this too. That thinking about what works for you on a day-to-day basis, not only with what you're wearing, who you're with, what you're doing, how you wake up, what you're eating, but really what you're putting into your mind. Yeah. And maybe it's different every day. I really push back against this kind of like ostrich in the sand idea that is pervasive in some circles in LA and New York of like, well, just take care of yourself, work on yourself, and then the world will get better because you're elevating yourself. I think it's finding the right blend for you based on what you're experiencing, what stressors are in your life, knowing that you need to continue to learn and grow and take in different information to understand the world and understand where we fit in it, but then also balance that with joy and pleasure and having a really embodied human experience. Yeah. And it's early to really, I think it's early. This conversation is early. Yeah. Right?
But honestly, we've been talking about that. I think that every show this year is, well, I'll go back to when I started. I was really motivated by the election. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had been wanting to be in this mix relational wise for a long time of like, look at how we are relating and not relating with each other and how we're communicating when a device is in the middle of that. And when my friends were picking some pretty intense forms of activism, I was like, hello, let's talk and connect with each other. And a couple of them were angry with me that I wasn't doing enough. And I was like, wait a second, like, I don't know what the balance is yet. I had no idea what I was doing, but I do know that if I'm going to make any difference or connect with people that are or start to like be a part of some of the solutions in the unique space that I can be in, I definitely have to care for myself, and I have to do this in groups. I have to I often refer to just sitting down with a person every week as fuel. Like, this is like the energy that I need to experience love and joy and connection with other people to take on that other stuff. And I do think there is like, there's some things that you got to take a look at, like the systems in your life. Like, if you were checking the news, if your phone is next to your bed and you're checking the news in the morning and you're starting the day with a lot of anxiety, and you have to compare, you have to do an A/B test to like understand if that's the thing that's affecting it, right? But if you know that, let's pick another time. And I think it's more of a two-part process where you do want to check in. You want to know what's going on in the world. But once you absorb that, and a lot of times I think it's landing like trauma in the body. Once you have that in you, I think we're all walking around with trauma at this point. I think it's a safe assumption.
But we have the capacity to handle it.
I don't know. Like, we do if we kind of take it and break it apart and reverse engineer and go, okay, what's my best system to deal with this?
Sure.
And I think part of that best system is I'm going to have a regular time where I connect with people that I love and talk about this stuff and release it. And if it's not people that I love, then at this point of where we are, I think that we should have the corner franchise. I talk about this a lot, that we're checking in for mental health. There's no more stigma. It's like the yoga works for our head. We can do physical things, throw stuff at a wall and break it, and then sit down and talk to people about what's on our mind, like why I had to do that.
But, I love that.
Right? Like, we need that. So that, like, just baking into our process, like, it's
franchise for the mind.
A franchise for the mind. But I was speaking to a journalist this weekend at a party, and she was talking about, she writes at home, and she found out, or she experienced herself experiencing isolation because she hadn't talked to a human being in like 5 days. She's been in writing processes. Like, we can't do that anymore like that. We know that this is important, and it is trying to find like systems to kind of check in with people, with each other. So I know it was a long rant, but
no, I get
you're getting to the stuff that like
I
we
get
really
it.
care
But
about.
I think that I'm thinking about that example, and had she not had that experience of isolation, she might not have been able to identify that she needed to be around people more.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. I've played with, I live here with no family members. I have worked for myself most of the time. Work with a lot of freelancers, and I've done some social experimentation with isolation, and in terms of immersing myself in it and then going out into it sounds really weird, but I'm just gonna but going out into a public place and knowing that I've just come off 4 days or 5 days of isolation, and how I don't have the same sort of interaction or feel or connection with people even in a grocery store. Like, it's very interesting to play in that space to see how damaging it is. Like, I think I'm totally, I think the cruelest thing that we're doing in this country is isolation in prisons and solitude.
Absolutely.
I think that's so
Have
cool.
you read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe?
No, but it sounds like something else I need to read.
So he is a well-known war correspondent. And he wrote this book called Tribe, and it was touching on how vets have been in situations where they are surrounded by comrades and friends, and they're living together and fighting for the same cause, and then they come back to the US and they're completely isolated. And what it does to mental health and well-being. And he has larger kind of stories around why we need to kind of return to more of our community and tribal living habits, and how important it is for our well-being in general and for the well-being of society.
I love it. I'm going to get that after the show. So there's 3 now. Look at her. She's got 3 book recommendations. So we're talking about big stuff right now, but I know you decided to experiment in this space based on what you know. And so let's talk about that. So now we're going to talk about avocados.
Yeah, we brought up grocery stores.
Yeah.
And I was excited.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, so yesterday I was at a Whole Foods on the west side having a walking meeting because I needed to go grocery shopping, and my friend wanted to talk to me about podcasting. And he's a vegan, and we're both kind of environmentally oriented, more so than many of our friends. And I was kind of decrying how much packaging there was in this store, and how I love buying what I buy, and I don't want to stop buying. What I'm obsessed with right now is mushroom jerky. Like, there are so many interesting mushroom jerky brands.
I didn't even know it existed.
It's so good. I love mushrooms. But the packaging is so small, and I'm like, I want to buy this in bulk. Why can't I buy a bag that's 10 times the size and it'll last? It's literally a dried food.
Yeah.
And he actually said, you know, what's damaging to the environment is people living alone and people living with fewer than 2 people. And this is creating this trend in these packaged goods and foods that make it so we have more waste. So this is where the conversation we were just having plays into the food conversation.
It just hit me, like, I can't even tell you where that just hit me. You're so right.
Yeah.
You're so right in that.
So speaking of living alone and food waste, I, as a 14-year pescatarian, mostly vegan, vegan at home, have been paying attention to avocados for quite some time now. We're Midwestern. It was a major treat and special occasion to have guacamole growing up. Not for lack of Mexican food in Chicago, but because it was expensive and it wasn't that pervasive. And I saw about 3 years ago the rise in avocado toast, not only in New York and LA, but in other places, and of course on social media. And also saw that there were spikes in avocado prices. And this, of course, coincided with the elections and the conversation around the US-Mexico wall. And I dove in a little bit journalistically and realized that the reason we even had so many more avocados than we had when we were younger was because of NAFTA. And then I found out that up to 60% of our produce in this country comes from the southern border. And started to draw some correlations between demand, increases in demand, and the potential catastrophe if there was a wall and our trade relations differed between the US and Mexico. And I thought about pitching a piece talking about avocado toast and avocados and the price spikes and how you know, there's more to US-Mexico relations than just immigration and people. But kind of sat back and said, I think it's not the right time. I was still running my company, and it was still kind of early on in the decrying of the news industry. And I'm like, I don't really want to write this piece and have nobody read it. You know? And so I kind of came up with this idea around making art instead of writing a piece. And I, on a personal level, have always really deeply appreciated art. It's something my family and I always endeavored to do when we would go visit places. We'd go to museums. There are pictures of me like drawing in corners when I was younger. I wasn't a good drawer, and I had some like real traumatic experiences with art classes growing up. I went to an amazing liberal arts public high school in Chicago, where everybody was like incredibly talented at what they did, and if you weren't like amazing, then it, you know, you weren't supposed to do that. And I was an amazing dancer, but I was not an amazing artist. And so I came up with this idea based on my experience going to installation art and kind of put it on the back burner. And this past November 2018, there was another price spike in avocados, and it was palpable. And I think you probably saw some of the signs at, you know, Mexican restaurants and then also at like bougie brunch places that served avocado toast saying like, hey, your avocados are going to be an extra $2 to $5, or we don't have them at all.
You could see it in the grocery store too, because you'd go back and they weren't there, and then the price was up. And I was shutting down my company, and I had an experience with friends driving out to southwestern Vermont and western Massachusetts, where I'd really wanted to go to a museum called Mass MoCA. There was a James Turrell exhibit, and it was like 20 miles out of the way, and they didn't want to go. They wanted to go jump in a river. And these were two of my best friends in New York, who I'd been friends with for like 5 to 7 years. And that really kind of made me realize that my orientation towards installation art was not normal. And it gave me the kind of energy. In a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, who knows? No judgment.
This word normal too, you know, like it needs to be.
But I was following my charm. I realized that my charm was unique, and I was following that charm.
Can I stop you from, is that a phrase that you use, or did you get that from somewhere?
My meditation teacher, Light Watkins, taught me that. I don't know where he got it from. I think it's archetypal. But so I, in the beginning of this year, decided to continue exploring this. NPR had covered Michoacan, the region where most of the U.S. avocados are grown. Fascinatingly enough, the type of avocados grown in this area in Mexico were actually created here in LA in 1925.
Interesting.
By a postal worker who is an amateur like horticulturalist, the Haas avocado. And of course, he only ever made like $3,000 off of it. He didn't actually have like the rights to this. And now 85% of U.S. avocados are Haas. which is interesting. But NPR was covering how the cartels were creating kind of violent scenarios in this region, but it wasn't widespread news. And again, I kind of turned on my media eye and said, well, I can pitch my editor at the New York Times and write a piece in the business section about the complexity with avocados and how the cartels have gotten involved. And there was also a really great segment on Adam Ruins Everything about it.
I love him.
And
it's a great series.
Yeah. But again, not widespread.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to talk to foodies. I didn't care about talking to policymakers at this point. Because who knows where their heads are at right now in this political climate.
Right.
They've got some other stuff to deal with besides the avocados. But I wanted to talk to foodies, and I realized that it was time to make this art piece because it was visual and it could live on Instagram, and we could have a conversation with foodies who, you know, there's over 100,000 tags of avocado toast and avocados on Instagram.
Jeez.
Right.
Yeah.
So I reached out to 15 of the top restaurants around LA, according to Yelp and like Foursquare, that serve avocado toast and guacamole, and just said to them, hey, I'm a journalist, a first-time artist. I love your restaurant. I'm also an environmentalist. I don't know if you're aware of what's been happening with avocados. Not only that the prices have been spiking up and down, that there's violence in Michoacan, also that they're deforesting the area where monarch butterflies propagate to grow more avocados to supply American demand. But would you be willing to give me a day's worth of avocado pits to make an art installation?
I'm just waiting for you to say that because I just imagine this car. Hey, can you give me your pits?
Right.
Yeah, like,
exactly.
Hey, you don't know me, but I would like your pits.
Right. And I also didn't even know if it was legal.
Right.
So, and very surprisingly, like all of them said yes. And when I dug a little bit deeper as to why they were down to go out of their way and change their food line for the day and salvage these pits and put them off to the side and save them for me, it turns out a lot of them knew more than I did about what had been happening with avocados for years.
Wow.
That over 70% of kitchen staffs in LA are Mexican American, and that they didn't feel like they had a platform to really kind of share how trends in social media and culture affect their day-to-day livelihoods and their businesses. And so I got to drive around collecting avocado pits and meeting these amazing chefs and restaurant operators. And we captured some of it on camera, which we'll be releasing soon. And then I spent a month trying to stabilize and dry these avocado pits, which, as I'm sure you know, they're actually the seed from which the tree grows.
Right.
And these things are very challenging to stabilize.
Yeah.
Like near impossible. I ended up having a lot of them kind of decay and become moldy. And that's when I learned all about the compost scene in Los Angeles. And LA Compost was our charity partner. We did a big dinner that was part of the LA Times Food Bowl. One of my closest friends, Charles Michele, was on a TV show on Netflix called The Final Table. It was a cooking show. And he connected me with Timothy Hollingsworth, who is the chef and part owner of Otium, the restaurant at the Broad Museum.
Yeah.
And the Broad Museum is amazing. It is a private collection of these philanthropists, and it's all contemporary art with a social justice leaning. Yeah. It's very edgy.
Yeah.
And it's downtown. Yeah. And
several times.
So we had this meeting, and it turned out Tim was actually from this part of California where the gold rush was centered. And what I haven't mentioned yet was that I ended up dyeing the avocado pits gold and making a giant wall of golden avocado pits in the shape of an avocado as a reference to kind of the new gold rush being around produce and other kind of trends. And he really resonated with that and said, I would love to do a dinner. Let's do it as part of the LA Food Bowl. And, you know, you have to apply to the Broad. I don't know if they're going to say yes to this. They have to approve your piece. And it really kind of spitballed into this big thing. We now still run an Instagram account that educates and empowers consumers around what's going on with avocados, what's going on with their food, talking about knowing your food. And it's been wild and so fun and so different than writing an article. It's this whole like holistic approach.
We talked last week about the beauty of a suspended conversation, right? Like not every conversation has to like have a start and the end, and most importantly, someone agreeing or winning the conversation, right? And I think suspending conversation is really the definition of relationship, like just being in communication with each other. So what I love about your story and what you did is, yes, you have this like living conversation and story, and it represents something where you didn't know what you were getting into.
Literally no idea.
Right? You didn't know, and you learned all these different things, and the story took its own turn, and so much knowledge. You're still, I mean, I'm sure if we talk to you in a year from now, there's going to be new things and new people involved. That opportunity is available to anybody. Like if you just start pulling a string somewhere, it will lead to something, and connection and people and all these people that you've met with this project, right?
Totally. And like permission, it was so interesting. I think I've done a lot of things that haven't worked. Right? As many things I've done that have worked.
How many avocado pits are in the installation, and then how many did you have to dispose of?
I collected about 4,500.
4,500.
Which was a mistake. I mean, I learned so much about artistic process, and you know, I had to wash them. And I couldn't wash all of them.
You had to dry them, like somehow dry them, right?
I ended up calling an avocado research scientist at University of California, Riverside, to try and figure out why I couldn't stabilize these things. Yeah. She sent me a research paper talking about how they have 6 unique carbohydrates in them, and I had activated sugars by baking them. I mean, it was so, for a person with a science background, it was actually like incredible. Did
you ever want to give up in this process? Like,
it wasn't an option. Okay. Like when you have a living, breathing material in your home that you are dealing with, and your charity partner is all about composting and not creating more methane gas coming out of landfills, and you're on the roster for a huge month-long event as part of the LA Times Food Bowl, and all these people are, there was no, that didn't even like come into my mind. The way I dealt with the challenges that were coming up was through humor. Like you had mentioned before, I do stand-up comedy, and I think like I was recording a lot of this on Instagram stories, and I've never had so much engagement on my Instagram. I'm not a huge fan of Instagram. Yeah. I have a complicated relationship with it.
I do too.
And I really like was honest. I was like in weird clothes the whole time. I was covered in like avocado schmutz and gold paint, and made so many mistakes, and I recorded all of it. And people were engaging with me deeply, more so than they ever have. And that really kept me going.
That's not surprising to me. I mean, honestly, we're so into we talk about systems, right? We're participating in all these different systems, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And one of the major systems that is established through social media is the system of appearance, appearance over everything, that one-dimensional, what do I look like today? Or what is this? And it's not making us well. And so what makes us well and feel our humanity and have the will to go and try and do things and grow and learn is vulnerability. Right. It's just glue, Right. And so it's not surprising.
Yeah, I was super vulnerable. Yeah. And I was trying to balance being vulnerable with also being funny. Yeah. And like irreverent and self-deprecating. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the tone I take on social media anyways, and it works for me. Yeah. That's not for everyone. You have to figure out who your audience is and your unique approach to it. Yeah. But it really worked for me. And I think in the end, the thing that kept me going was like working with my friends. I had so many friends show up and help, whether it was collecting the avocado pits, whether it was spray painting them with me, whether it was helping me come up with an Instagram strategy, whether it was doing this big dinner together. And we had a panel, and we had people come and be on this panel, and I just felt super supported. And it goes back to interdependence. Yes. I had been doing so many things alone for so long, which like that's my personal psychology, right? Yeah, I can relate to that. So
but you were kind of trained to do that.
Yeah.
I can't get to it. We're having volume issues, but okay, we're good. Thanks, Dee.
But yeah, so I think like working with friends that I really deeply respect. I posted something about kinship and this kind of notion that there's friendship and then there's something like kind of deeper, which is friendship with like kind of wholehearted support and willingness to go out of your way for someone.
You know how I explain that? So I talk, I love questions I love curiosity. I think that's like another type of glue that keeps us connected. And so I say, you know, you have a lot of friends that know what you do, right? They know what you do. But you have very few friends that know why you do it.
And I love that.
Yeah, and so like the why friends is what we're trying to get to. So I know I'm having audio issues, and I'm literally going to have to disrobe to fix this problem. So what I'm going to ask you, because we're running short on time, so we're going to skip this while I do some weird adjustments and try to be ladylike about this.
Totally.
I'm going to ask you, what does the phrase exceptional human encounters mean? We're totally there in terms of what you just shared, and then give me an example of one, which it feels like you already have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep talking about this one particular friend since we're on that. But I'm in a social network of human beings called Sandbox. And I've met a lot of people around the world over the last kind of 5-7 years through this network. And they're people who are like-minded, some similar values, but live in over 50 cities around the world, and have all kind of achieved a certain level of success before a certain age. But mostly we hang out because we want to go on adventures together, and we care about endeavoring to make the world a little bit incrementally better. And one of these people I met in a jungle in Panama in 2014 at an off-grid eco farm that has like a study abroad program for environmental science students. And it was a wild experience there. It was raining the whole time, and we were just like literally soaked to the bone. But we became friends through that. And subsequently, I've stayed with his family in Bordeaux, and he's come to my family, our house for dinner multiple times. And he's Parisian and Colombian, and I'm Midwestern. It is wild that we've even met, right? And this is when I'm grateful for things like the internet and for social networks. But we worked on this avocado project together, and he was the one who enabled me to ultimately do it at OTM and the Broad. And I think that is an exceptional human encounter, kind of trusting.
The longevity, it's an example. We haven't heard this example, honestly, because everybody answers this question differently, obviously. You know. But I'm hearing longevity is the exceptional human encounter of staying
there. Not knowing what's going to happen from a relationship. So trusting that in a group of 250 people, this one conversation, this one experience is worth continuing to follow up on, and bouncing around and going out of the way to meet each other's families, meet each other in places around the world. We're lucky to be able to do that, and to continue to help each other when we need help, and not knowing where it's going to end up.
It's just showing up.
Totally.
Showing up, and which is not it's not a behavior that happens too often in LA. I don't know if you have found this. I've lived in Michigan, obviously. I lived in Texas, and now I've lived here. And there's a little bit of commitment issues in terms of like, oh, let's do this. Oh no, a better thing came up, or oh, I'm not gonna. I don't know. You know, there's something here because we have a lot of choices. I think. So it seems like there's something challenging in the mix here because there's so much going on that.
Well, it's choices meets infrastructure challenges, right? So the time pressure of having to commute somewhere, to drive somewhere, to park somewhere. I mean, the difference between living in LA when I was in college here, 2005 to 9, and now is night and day because of ride sharing and because of the increased investment in public transportation. But I think that you have to be so much more keyed into what you're feeling, how you're feeling, who you want to spend time with, and what you want to do on a day-to-day basis here than you do per se in other cities. Because of that extra time pressure and that extra effort required to get yourself somewhere. I would say that I feel really grateful for the types of people I've surrounded myself with and invested extra time, energy, and effort into. And I feel like my relationships here are probably deeper than most other places, but it took time.
Well, it took, based on everything that you share, and thank you. Like I feel like we've really gotten to know you in this hour, and your history. Like you've really tracked it really well, like where you came from and where you are right now. So thank you for that, for sharing that. But it sounds like for you, like you followed, what did you say? Your bliss?
Charm.
Your charm. You kept this following your charm, and thankfully you had this mentor that taught you about that early on. And the charm and really cultivating you and being who you are helped you connect with other people.
Totally.
And your appreciation, because you've talked about slowness of things. Like, so I think you took some time, some creative time to figure out what that was. And I think there's
and
a lot
moved out of New York and back here.
Yeah.
Knowing full well that LA creates this space that not only allows for slowness if you don't play into I need to be here, there, everywhere, right?
Yeah.
You kind of pull back from that and say, I'm going to be super deliberate about where I'm going. But also, it's the type of city that allows permission for new types of experiments. I was talking to Hamza Walker, the head of LAX Art, who moved here from Chicago, and we both agreed that you can't try new formats in so many other places, but here in LA you can. And I moved back here to play more in narrative. I'm writing a fiction book. I'm making another documentary. I did this art piece, but the news industry was no longer working for me in New York. Maybe I'll eventually go back to news, and I love the news, but I needed to come out here to expand the ways I was telling stories and which formats, and I really believe in meeting audiences where they're at, which I know you believe too.
I do. Well, that's a good place to transition into something else. So I talked about before we sat down that we would do a social challenge together, and I've completely shifted off of what I thought I was going to do. It was going to be more media focused. So I want to co-create this with you. So put you on the spot a little bit, but I think you can handle it.
Yeah.
So there's something, again, that I'm just really feeling connected to in your story about following your charm and finding out who you are, and not making your own time with that, like really having your own relationship with time. And I'm wondering what we can do to create a challenge for people to experience that a little bit. And maybe, so let's just talk this out. Like,
okay.
What am I leaned into for a minute here? It's like I want to put a challenge out that helps explore finding your people.
Sure. So I think a really beautiful reference is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Now that book I have read.
Great.
Everybody's read that book, I think.
I feel like we're talking about an artist state, right? Where she touches on spend 2 to 4 hours a week doing something new or doing something that you wouldn't normally do, but it gives you the chance to then reflect on what you liked about that.
So I think we're back to art.
Right.
And we've talked about this a lot on this show, is like, generally speaking, people that have sat where you're sitting today, and I feel this way too, there's a connection between art and spirituality, of like and spirituality in terms of really accepting all kind of guidance, all things that are kind of coming into your system, and being moved by it, allowing yourself to be moved and touched in ways that, like, wow, like I'm seeing the world differently. So we're talking art now, I think. Finding your charm is through an art project. So I think this is an art social experiment.
Cool. I'm into it.
You're into it? Now I just got to put some context out on it. Well, I mean, there's a couple ways we go about doing this. Honestly, someone could just think about, where do you find yourself being creative, and just explore that a little bit more, or trying something completely different and maybe having to go somewhere, like if you haven't been to a museum lately or an art exhibit.
Okay, I have an idea.
Okay, you have an idea?
So like for me,
good.
Again, like I keep going back to, like, I definitely had a traumatic experience believing I was not an artist growing up, right? Which I think a lot of people have had. Like our teachers telling you, no, you're not good enough at this to do this.
We talked about that at the beginning of the hour too. Like people being told that they have a learning disability or they can't learn. And then you're absorbing that as your story. And
right.
going,
Which is, I so push back on that. But I think, again, what got me to move forward into the notion that I could competently create art with permission from serious institutions was noticing what I was attracted to, right? I was attracted to installation art, so I made an installation art piece. I wasn't attracted to paintings, and I didn't try to paint when I knew that's not my medium at all. Maybe right now it's not. So I think an interesting challenge would be spend the next few days seeing in your day-to-day life what you're attracted to.
I love it. I love it.
Is it a billboard? Is it a book? Is it a
color,
food?
a texture?
Is it Tiny Chef?
It's Tiny Chef for me. It's
right?
so Tiny Chef.
So what is it that you are attracted to that might be different than another person? And then start to unpack where that attraction comes from, what it is about that attraction that really deeply resonates with you, and can you then kind of play off of that and create something associated with that attraction.
Yeah. So love it. Perfect. Okay, so it's an attraction challenge, and it can go anywhere, but we think it's probably going somewhere artistic. And it's probably journaling. You're going to have to keep a record of what it is. So kind of keep something, you can do it on your phone or keep it, whatever. Again, what are you attracted to? Do you need a nice like paper that smells and a pen, or can you do this on your phone? But keep track. So your mission for the next 7 days is to pay attention to what you're attracted to.
Can we call it the attraction tracker?
Yes. Yes, we can.
I love words. So I think that's
do.
powerful.
Yes, we can. The attraction tracker. I love it. That's a little hard to say. The attraction tracker
Only as hard
social
as the
challenge.
neuroplasticity word, right?
Yeah, totally. I'm not even going to try that again. So that's the challenge. You're going to pay attention to what you're attracted to for 7 days. You're going to write about it. And then this is probably a 2-week challenge. And you can take it longer. But spend the next week after that going, okay, why and what more can I explore here?
Yeah, I love that.
I love it. I might do this one too. I'm feeling
right into the summer solstice.
I think I kind of know at this point what I'm attracted to, but who knows? Like
you never know.
You never know. And this is what, this is what's so amazing about this thing that we carry around in our beautiful heads. So I love it. I love it. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. I really enjoyed this. You are a source for a lot of information and inspiration, and I really love what you're doing. I loved it from the minute that I heard about it, so I'm really glad that we had this opportunity. I'm going to definitely press Erika for some of the resources she talked about, so we'll get a list of books that you talked about and anything else after the show that you feel is nice to share as a resource. We'll do that. And keep us updated with what's going on. The link to follow the Avocado Project is the Avocado Rush, right?
Yeah, like the Gold Rush, but
like the
Gold Avocado Rush.
Yeah, the Avocado Rush. So you can follow that and pay attention to what's going on. And if you have avocado knowledge, she's attracted to that right now. So this would be a good way to interact with her in a meaningful way on social media too.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank
you for having me.
I've so enjoyed it. Thank you for being here. That is the end of another episode. As always, I just want to encourage you to think about how can you make an exceptional encounter happen today. See you next week.